Last year I sat down for a long chat with Chris Vail, the CEO and founder of NTH Watches. Due to the time difference, I spoke to Chris from my home office, hence the alternate office decor. In a series of 4 videos, we covered many watch-related subjects. In this video, we broached the subject of Homage watches. What really is the intention of these creations? Is it to make the unattainable possible? Or let our imaginators move into the what-if territory?
We've been working with WatchGecko now for, I guess, close on 2 years. And we started doing some special editions of the Devil Rays for WatchGecko. And then John, Quinn, and the rest of the team there said, we'd like to do some different versions of the subs. So, why don't you let us sort of give us the basic case design and we'll whip up some ideas. And what's interesting here is the subs are all homages to sort of iconic tool watches from the 50s through the early 70s. But we've always tried to avoid being too much or too on the nose with the designs. So we've tried to do things like we made the cases much thinner. We added water resistance. We never did anything that was too exact, a one-for-one sort of design reproduction. What's interesting about the WatchGecko designs is that they really sort of steer into that vintage inspiration, that sort of homage territory with thicker crystals, the Mercedes handsets, some of the sort of design cues, the version of the neck-in that's Admiral Blue, as you call it, is I think very, very close to the original Tudor Snowflake MN sub, at least in spirit, if not entirely in execution. It's closer than what we've made with some of our versions of the neck-in. I think the Amphions are not as close to being like the mill subs, but they're closer to being like the Rolex Submariners of that time frame, the civilian ones. You've got this reef green version of the neck-in that's very much like a Rolex Kermit in its color scheme. So they're very interesting. We had a mission, a design mission for the original subs to make them as thin as we possibly could. So they came in at 11.5 millimeters thick with 300 meter water resistance, which was really groundbreaking at the time. This is going back 6 years. You guys went ahead and you put these enormously thick crystals on them. The watch is ballooned up to 13 millimeters thick, which actually isn't that thick by today's standards for a dive watch, even a 300 meter water resistance diving watch. But they're a lot thicker than what we were making. And the crystal thickness, the increased crystal size is very noticeable. So they do have, I think, a much more vintage feel than what we were making, what we were making, I think, was sort of a modern interpretation of something that was inspired by vintage watches. Yours is, I think, like I said, much closer to the vintage originals in terms of how it feels. So it's been interesting to watch. I wasn't sure how they would do. I was very happy to see that the response was phenomenal, and we were able to go ahead and make another production run right away.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the first batch sold out. I mean, it was you can't do better than that. And as we've all worked hard to get batch 2 up and running, which I think went live yesterday, or the day before. I mean, I found it a really interesting project because I quite often strap one on when I'm in the office, and we've almost like provided the watch, I think, that people would really, really love to own but can't necessarily attain.
I mean, they're hard to find. Even if you could find a vintage Tudor Snowflake sub at auction, even beat to hell. What are they, $40,000, $50,000? I don't know what that is in pounds, maybe 30,000 pounds.
To be honest, they've got to the stage now where if I find a really lovely one, I mean, I would love to have something a bit like, what Connery wore in Dr. No type look. But I mean, I don't even look at the price because I know it's going to be prohibitive. And I think that's been the real strength of these watches. The fact that we've, obviously with your expertise, we've been able to provide a watch that not only gives people the look and feel of what could be potentially their grail watch. And I'm always very cautious of using that term, but it does bounce around. Yet we've given them in a really capable package. I mean,
Yeah.
this is not these watches are not gimmicks, as you were saying earlier. I mean, these are full blown 300-meter dive watches with, with full lume and all the capability you could want to have a 300-meter in a 300-meter watch.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's, even if you have the means to buy a vintage Tudor or a vintage Rolex from those eras, would you ever really wear one out in the world? They're priceless. The parts maybe aren't, the replacement parts maybe can't be had at any price. The performance maybe isn't great. I don't know that I would trust the water resistance on a watch that old unless it's been thoroughly inspected. So if you just want that look and you actually want to wear it and enjoy it rather than have it be a safe clean or an investment, yeah, I think we're offering a great alternative. You know, you can have all of the flavor of a vintage 6538 or a vintage Tudor Snowflake sub for, I don't know, what are you selling them for? $800, 700 pounds, something like that. At that price, and you know, like you said, very capable. They
Yeah.
do all the things that you would want a watch to do with the look of something that you would never think about wearing out in the world, and at a price that you really don't have to worry about maybe banging it on the door frame as you lumber through.
I mean, one of the things that we found very interesting about the batch one was if you take, for example, the Amphion that's in grey, which has been branded the Anchor. People that really resonated with people. It was, one of the first to sell out because it was almost like the classic Submariner reimagined in a slightly more contemporary color. And, there's quite a gamble when you go for that thing because there's always that, the adage, don't mess with the classics. But in that new color, it had that rather sort of almost gunmetal look to it. And it
Mhm.
really resonated with people because you always said, you would always think to yourself, wow, the original watch would have looked really cool in this color. And fortunately, the buyers of the NTH vintage subs agreed.
Yeah, and I guess it goes back to some of the fears and worries that I had when we were looking at the designs here. You know, you did not just a date on all of them, but a magnifier, a cyclops, which a lot of watch enthusiasts profess to despise. You did the Mercedes hands, which a lot of watch
Yeah.
enthusiasts profess to despise. Like I said, I mean, these designs are much more on the nose in terms of their vintage inspiration than what we had been doing previously. Um, but I do agree that there's still enough there to differentiate them and keep them from being just one for one design reproductions. And there is still that sort of sense of imagining what if. What if Rolex or Tudor had made this model back then in these colors? What if they had done applied indices rather than a printed dial? What if the MOD did issue one with sort of a gunmetal gray color and applied markers? What would that look like today? Or would those be collectibles today? So I guess it's sort of a alternate reality version of history. What things may have looked like back then that weren't, or what those things may have evolved to become but didn't. So I like that. That's one of the things I like about doing watch design when you're taking inspiration from vintage pieces is that you have an opportunity there to pay homage to what you like about the original, but also do something a little bit different. And I think that's really the key when you're doing designs that are going to be recognizable as homages. You have to bring something new to the table, even if it's just something very small. You have to sort of add your own little twist to it and say, okay, this is something that never existed but might have, or had they continued to develop this particular design that they stopped developing, this is what it might look like today.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that that's what the buyers obviously signed up to as well, because we did know we thought obviously that the straight the straight black Submariner would definitely go, and there's always that you think, well, I wonder if people will click with the other color schemes, but they have. So anyway, I think we've got 25 of each again, so it's a very very
Mhm.
limited quantity again. So. Let's hope we're having a chat in a few months and I can say again they're all sold out. I suspect they will be, to be honest, because there was such a demand for them.
Yeah, as soon as you sold out, I started getting emails from people asking me when would they come back into stock? Would I have any available from my website? And to be honest, it was a little bit frustrating because some of the customers, we have our own version of the Amphion that we just brought back the Amphion Vintage Gilt, which has sword hands, um, and a gilt relief dial rather than applied markers. And so there were a couple of customers that would email us and say, before the Amphion even came back into our stock, you were sold out. We'd have customers saying, when can I buy the Amphion? And I thought they were asking about the vintage gilt that we were showing on our website that was going to be delivered last month. So this was late summer, early fall when I was getting these emails, when they were in fact talking about the WatchGecko version. So I had to kind of spend some time clarifying, okay, which version do you mean? And even at that, I mean, I think it was sometimes confusing for some of the customers, so it was a little bit more confusing for me. Um, but yeah, it's an interesting experience for me to hand my sort of case design over to WatchGecko and see what WatchGecko does with it, and to wonder, okay, are people going to like this or not? Is this going to sell very well or not? And to see what somebody else does with the sort of same basic recipe. What does their final dish taste like? Um, and again, we're obviously all very happy that they did very well for WatchGecko and that we could make another 100 pieces right away.
I was also noting as well, last time I was down, that we had the latest iterations of the Swiftsure and Scorpene had come in.
Hmm.
Now, I hadn't seen those previously, and they struck me as being something actually just a little bit different from you. I mean, you'll have to tell me if I've gone down a wrong road here, but to me, I was definitely getting almost a little bit of a hybrid between a dive and a field watch from them both. They both had that classic 369 sort of explorer look to them,
Hmm.
especially the Scorpion with the sort of the oversized minute markers. It was a real field watch look to me, and I actually then took one of the watches. You'll probably roll your eyes in horror here, and I put it onto a brown leather strap just to try and see how it looked as a field watch. I have to say, it looked really good in that sort of guise. Was this a conscious decision on your part to go for something a bit different, or was it just the way the design evolved?
So it's interesting that you see a connection between those two because I really don't. The Scorpen was one of the original 8 subs designs we came up with when we launched NTH 6 years ago. And it was inspired by watches like the Seiko Spork and the Zinn 857, which in turn were inspired by vintage cockpit clocks, that sort of big pilot numbering 12, 36912, with the white, completely whited out, white frame sword hands and the big minute markers. And we definitely were looking more at that sort of cockpit clock style when we did the Scorpen. So it's a hybrid. It's not a hybrid of a field watch and a dive watch. From my perspective, it's a hybrid of a pilot watch and a dive watch. Um, and of course, we just slathered loom all over it, so it's just kind of a crazy loom monster. And that's actually one of my favorite designs. And per, it's perpetually been one of our more popular subs designs. Um, the Swiftsure is part of the 2K1 subs range, so named because they have 2001 feet of water resistance. When we were selling a lot of the 40 millimeter subs, this is probably 3 years ago, um, there were those guys with bigger wrists that say, I can't wear a 40 millimeter. When are you going to make something larger? So I said, okay, we want to do an XL, an extra large or a large version of the subs. We have to figure out the size. We have to figure out what the designs are going to look like. And this was leading into 2020 at a time when I was getting a lot of flack online about how many subs we were making and how so many of them were, in so many people's eyes, just an homage of a Rolex or a Tudor or what have you. So I had an interest in getting away from doing something that was, like I said, so on the nose in terms of its design inspiration, but still drew from the the right sources of inspiration in the right way still kind of had the same cues. So we looked at obviously like Rolex Explorer dials. You can see that in the font of the Swiftsure. We looked at the Pelagos. You can see that in the sort of rectangular markers and the white frame hands. We also looked at things like the ball. Um, God, I think it was one of the engineer divers. I forget the model, but we looked at that. We looked at various other things, and we made, I think, subtle changes. So if you look at the Thresher, there's a lot of Pelagos influence there, but the markers are different, the hands are different. We did some different things with the notched rehaut that the markers are set into. Um, it's a very, very subtle thing that we did with the Swiftsure, but we looked at the font of the 3, 6, and 9 on the Rolex Explorer, and where the on the 6 and the 9, where the loop, the circle, the oval part meets the neck of the 6 or the 9, there's a little sort of divot there where it kind of dips in. And the closer we looked at that, the more I thought, that's kind of a weird thing that they did there. I don't know if that was just part of the typeface or if it's something that Rolex deliberately did, but we ended up deleting that and kind of taking it out. And most people would never notice, but it was just a little thing that we said, we're going to do this a little bit differently. So the Swiftsure, to bring it back to your question, I think is more of just a diving watch that has a big number, sort of a orientation to it for people that like that sort of thing. This is the sort of thing they would like. And I just think it's sort of, again, an homage to various Rolex models without being a one-for-one design reproduction of any of them.
The last NTH that I wore, which was actually very recently for a review, was the NTH Necken Modern Blue. And I had it home with me, and there was a very good friend of mine who writes for the magazine occasionally, has always wanted to buy a Tudor Pelagos. And I wanted him to see it. And his main issue with the Tudor is that he can't afford it. And he won't mind me saying that. He knows exactly who he is. And I wanted to show him the NTH. And his first reaction was, gosh, it does look quite like it. But then, much to my delight, and I think we've discussed this before to your own, he started to very, very quickly see the strengths of the watch in its own right. And the fact that it was a very capable piece, and there's actually quite a lot of differences. And I just we've mentioned the word homage so much in this little chat, and I just wanted to talk to you about it because it is kind of the elephant in the room, how some of the watches do look rather similar to other brands. We feel there's a space in the market for that. You do too, but could you just maybe expand a bit more on your thoughts of the homage, the whole homage argument?
Okay, so that's a lot of ground to cover.
Yeah, sorry, yeah.
No, that's okay. I'm trying. Before I start speaking, I want to see if I can take a moment just to organize my thoughts. So let me start with the Pelagos, or how do you pronounce it? Pelagos? I'm not sure which is right.
Beats me. We know the Tudor we mean.
Over here, I think we say Pelagos. Anyway, I like that watch. I've tried one on, and I liked it a lot better in pictures than I did on my wrist. I thought it was a little bit too big, a little bit too slab-sided. I don't mind titanium, especially in a watch that size. I think it's a good choice because it's a little bit big and chunky. But, I just, regardless of whether or not you could afford it, I felt like it wasn't worth it to me personally. And if I sold a few watches, I could afford a Pelagos. I don't like it enough to spend that kind of money. So I think that's one avenue we could go down with this homage argument is, it's not simply a matter of making a watch that is a less expensive version of something else. It could be making a watch that is is closer to what you really want than something that happens to be more expensive. So it's not simply a matter of price. It's not simply a matter of, well, I can't afford the Rolex, so I'm going to buy an NTH. It may be, what, I don't like the Rolex as much, or I don't like the Tudor as much. I actually like the NTH more, or I like the fill in the blank, the Steinhardt more, the Chris Ward more, whatever. So that's part of it. I also feel like I guess the snob in me says, if you want a Rolex Hulk, yeah, there are inexpensive homages, but if all you're doing is buying a less expensive homage because you just don't want to spend the money on a Hulk or you can't afford the Hulk, okay, I get it. I'm not gonna look down my nose at you as the buyer because not everybody can afford a Hulk, and I get that. But from the perspective of a brand owner and a designer, there's really nothing interesting to me about a less expensive version of the Hulk. It would be more interesting to me if you did something just a little bit different, or if you went and you made something that was an homage of the Kermit, which Rolex doesn't make anymore, the green bezel, black dial version of the sub. And if you took that idea, even if you were to reproduce it in a one for one sort of way, that's fine because they don't make that watch anymore. So that's another, I think, avenue or an aspect of the homage debate and argument is it's not simply a matter of whether or not I can afford it. I can't find it. And if I, in your case, if I want a Tudor Snowflake sub from the early 70s and a Marine Nationale, or if I want a Rolex Mill sub, they're impossible to find. And even if you can find one, I mean, they're rare as hen's teeth. A mill sub at auction, I think, went for $100,000 or pounds. Who would wear it? I just want to wear the watch. I like the mill sub look. I like the Tudor Snowflake look. I actually want to wear it. I don't want to put it in a safe. It's not an investment. It's something that I want to enjoy almost daily. So I think there's an argument to be made that there's a legitimate purpose for homages when the original source of inspiration is no longer produced, can't be had at any price because it's as rare as hen's teeth and you wouldn't wear it if you could find one. They are not necessarily easy to repair. Um, and when the homage does something a little bit different than the original, and I think that's even more important when the original is still a little bit more or less available, like it is with, say, the Rolex Hulk or the Tudor Black Bay or Pelagos. So there's, I think, an argument to be made about accessibility. Price is certainly a consideration. Differences in design. A watch that is somewhat smaller and somewhat thinner, or doesn't have a date window, or has an optional date window, or doesn't have a helium release valve poking out at 10 o'clock, that can make a huge difference for some guys. I like the Planet Ocean. I don't like the date window or the 10 o'clock helium release valve. I think a watch that expensive maybe needs a better bezel insert material than a very thin anodized aluminum sheet. Um, I really like the Zen 857. I just think it's a tad too big, and I'd like it better if it didn't have a date window. I really like I think the Tudor Black Bay 58 is a fantastic watch. I also think it's slightly slab-sided, and I honestly don't think certainly not to me. It isn't worth whatever they are now, $4,000, $3,500. And I feel like for me, the Barracuda Vintage Black with a gilt relief dial, something that even Rolex doesn't do anymore, is a more interesting watch, especially at the price. But even regardless of price, I think it's a more interesting watch to me. And maybe I'm biased because I sell them, but I think that's true of a lot of watches. I mean, I look at other brands and what they're doing. I think that you know Stratton or I think the chronographs from Youngins are really good looking. The Meisterscope or the Youngins Chronoscope, those are great looking watches. Um, Stratton is a young brand out of Switzerland. They're doing a lot of really interesting chronograph designs. Formex, the guys from Notice are doing great designs. Dorenzo, Avig, and I don't want to mention all my competitors and a bunch of brands that WatchGecko doesn't sell, but I think there's a lot of brands doing designs that are inspired by something else, but there's a lot of value in what they're doing just the same, no matter how much inspiration is there. And it's not simply a matter of, well, they're selling it for less. I think they're really doing great design work in many cases.
Many thanks for watching this video. Check out all 4 in the series with Chris, and don't forget to subscribe to the WatchGecko YouTube channel and the magazine for the latest news, reviews and conversations.